But now I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined by Labour's Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell. Very good to see you this morning. Now, you've talked about Labour wanting to remain in what you've called a customs union. Look, I'm obviously a bit thick, but what is the difference between a customs union and the customs union?
It's the ability to be able to influence the trade deals that will go off in the future. If the argument is if we remain in the customs union, like Turkey, you don't have that same level of influence. So we're suggesting a customs union should be on the table for negotiation. Right. So instead of having this asymmetric relationship, you have a symmetrical relationship where you can influence those. I think...
So can I just... Because I just want to be clear, therefore, that I do... Which I think I do understand what you're saying, but I just do want to clarify. You are perfectly happy with membership of a customs union where third-party trade deals are done by the European Union, so long as we can influence those trade deals.
What we're saying to the government is don't take that off the table, because I think there's a constructive debate to be had around that. And in talking to other Europeans, again, there's a real discussion that could be had around that. So we're saying to the government, don't take this off the table. We've got to have this debate. And in some ways, I welcome what the Prime Minister is doing in saying we're now going to set out what our purposes and what our ambitions are, etc. I find it a bit bizarre that she's not allowing Philip Hammond or Amber Rudd to participate.
She has categorically said... Actually, that she wouldn't allow, if she's Prime Minister, the UK to remain in the kind of customs union you are talking about.
I think it's the wrong way around. I think what she's doing now should have been done ages ago. What we want to do is say, look, this is the sort of Britain we want for the future. This is the sort of Britain and Europe we want for the future. What is the relationship and what are the best structures to achieve that? If she's coming out with a similar sort of debate, at least we can engage in that debate now. It'll be a rational debate. But what we're saying is, do not rule out some of these structures, like a customs union, before you have that debate.
Now, your colleague Andrew Gwynne just said, actually, over on the BBC, that another thing that Labour is very critical about is this idea that the transition period should be a maximum of 2 years. So how long do you think it could or should be?
What we've said, I think Keir Starmer's got it exactly right on this. He said as short as possible, but as long as necessary. We've said to the government, look,
Andrew Gwynne said it's inconceivable that we could negotiate a trade deal within the 20 months.
Well, ask Liam Fox, because I don't think, 7 years is the average for a trade deal that could be negotiated. So what we're... So
could we be in the transition period
for
7 years,
I think we've got to be realistic. We've said 2 years to remain in the customs union and single market.
As a minimum?
As a minimum. That gives us the stability. Beyond that, I can't see it going much beyond that, but... What we've said is at least give us that stability for that period. At the moment, there's no stability. And businesses and trade unions and others are coming to us supporting that view, and I'm hoping that we'll get consensus with the government on that eventually.
When I talk to representatives of other governments in Europe, they say they can't understand why this government is looking for a transition rather than asking the EU for simply an extension of membership. Because they say, wouldn't it be better for the UK to continue to be able... I mean, you say you want influence over future trade deals as part of a customs union, but why not argue just to stay in the EU until everything is negotiated?
The whole purpose of our intent, really, is to try and bring the country back together again. We mustn't do anything, I think, that divides the country again. It is divided already. I've been touring around, speaking in smaller towns, in particular up north, and there is still that strong division within our society. We mustn't do anything that exacerbates those divisions. Our purpose is to bring people back together again. And above all else, we should do nothing that allows the right, the UKIPs, to reinvent themselves around this particular issue. So I think we need to have patient, moderate discussion of what our objectives are, what our relationship should be and what the structures will work effectively for us.
But, I mean, even Jacob Rees-Mogg has said that the problem with being in a transition rather than remaining in as member of the EU is that we become effectively a vassal state. But that must worry you, doesn't it?
Of course it does, and that's why part of if we were in the negotiations now, we would be saying, look, can we negotiate the sort of relationship we have during that period in which we do have a say, in which we are part of the rule-making rather than the rule-taking? And I think there's a new spirit in the negotiations in Europe in particular that is now looking more constructively at how we can go forward. But what you can't have is this attitude, from the Prime Minister. If she doesn't get everything she wants, she's going to walk away. I've negotiated in Europe in my professional life. You negotiate best on the basis of mutual interest and mutual trust. One of the things we could, I just throw one thing into it, one of the things we could do to restore some of that mutual trust is give EU citizens the rights that they need.
Now, the other big thing you've been talking about over the weekend are your plans to take back into control a series of important industries, water, rail, Royal Mail. In the 70s, up to the time that many of these industries were nationalised, they chronically under-invested. I mean, the concern that many people would have is that nationalisation will simply allow these industries to wither on the vine.
That's why we're not going back to that model. That centralised, status, bureaucratic model will never work again. What we're looking at is a devolved models where you bring together at the region. Take water, for example, at the regional level.
And there was terrible underinvestment in water during the years.
But what we've had since then with privatisation, we published the figures today from the House of Commons Library. £14 billion worth given out in shares to shareholders, dividends to shareholders, at the same time underinvestment, and at the same time prices going up 40%.
But there has been a significant increase in investment relative to the period of public ownership.
Based upon borrowing. When water was privatised, all borrowing was wiped off. They've now massively increased the borrowing, increased the charges to customers, and paid dividends to shareholders, many of whom are in tax havens not paying taxes. We're being ripped off. So what we're saying is we want a model. Look, in Wales now, water is provided on a not-for-profit
What is this model then? Say these things won't be 100% owned by the public sector.
This is what's happening right the way across Europe, actually. What it will be publicly owned. You'll bring together the workers, the consumers and the expert managers to manage it in a devolved regional basis for water.
So owned by the government, 100%, but managed on a different basis?
Owned by the public, managed on the...
When you say with the public, just to be clear, because you mean by the state?
The people. We will own water. We will buy it back from the shareholders. We'll issue them
at market value. Will you buy it at market value?
Parliament will determine the value. All nationalisations.
So you won't give a commitment that you'll buy it at the market price.
Parliament will determine the value. That's always been the case when we bring things back into public ownership. What would be the
alternative to buying it at market value?
Well, Parliament will determine. They'll take into account, for example, what's happened in terms of debt levels, investment levels, that sort of thing. Parliament will determine the price. We'll issue bonds for shares, and on that basis, because this is a profitable industry, the income we get for that will cover any borrowing costs. But also, if you look at the latest research...
Can I just pick up one little point?
Well, let me just finish this point. Please, If you look at the latest research, all the evidence demonstrates that if we cut out this, 18 billion over the last 10 years that's gone in dividends to shareholders, if we cut out that, we'll be able to reduce prices and have consistent investment, which we haven't had so far.
I should just point out, though, that you are making an assumption, which is that a future government, Labour government that nationalised, would be able to borrow at the same low interest rates as are currently the case. Because if interest rates went up, of course, then there would be less money to invest.
If you look at the level of profit,
water.
if you look at the level of profits made in the water sector, they'll be sufficient to cover even if interest rate goes up.
Now, don't go away because I've got lots more to ask John McDonnell after the break. Welcome back to Peston on Sunday, and I'm delighted that John McDonnell wasn't deselected during the ads, and he's still here. But before we get back to the interview, a few words from Allegra.
John has already swiveled round in his chair. You've been on this programme enough times to know. But look, since the election gave the Tories the fright of their life, Labour have had a bit of a swagger, have they not? But the question is, are they doing as well as they should be? Look at this. This is pretty complicated, but I will try to walk you through. This is the change in support for the opposition 8 months after an election, OK? Remember him, William Hague, IDS, David Cameron. They're all putting up quite a lot of support. They go up in support after 8 months after election. 8 months after 2010, you've got Ed Miliband in charge, and he's up +6. Jeremy Corbyn in the 2015 election +1. But then look at this, not so good. Since the 2017 election, he is down, John McDonnell. He is down by 3. You are nodding very gravely. Marginally down. OK, well, we can discuss that in a second. But it is nonetheless, compared to these healthy numbers, not so good. So then let's look more closely at what has actually happened. So you can see Labour in red, of course, and it's very, very healthy up here. And then goes down. And let's just animate on what has happened, quite how bad a time the government has had, and yet Labour has not managed to capitalise. So, very quickly, this point is when Theresa May had that terrible conference, the letters fell off the screen, it was all a disaster, and yet Labour goes down. Here we have 2 cabinet ministers resigning, and Labour just flatlines. And here, Health Secretary told me this week this has been the worst ever winter for the health service, and yet you're not capitalising. Why are you not doing better?
Let me do 2 things. One, we had the big, 12 months ago, we were 24 points behind. We had the big surge in the general election campaign. And then after that, we've been round about 40 points in the polls. All of this is within a 3-point margin of error, so that's that. But I think Brexit...
But are you disappointed that you haven't consolidated what looked like in the immediate aftermath of the election to be a bit of a lead for you? In fact, it's been eroded.
I didn't... Again, it's not that much of a lead after the election. It's about 3 or 4 points within the margin of error. My view, and this sounds a bit counterintuitive, I know, you mentioned swagger before. I don't think any of us have been swaggering, but actually I've been saying to people, we need something like this to also say, look, every vote has to be won, every vote has to be battled for, and Brexit changes the atmosphere as well.
Well, I was going to ask you about that because you very generously said that you'd read the book what I wrote, and therefore you'll be completely aware about the British election study, which said that the main reason for the surge, the number one reason, there were other reasons as well, the number one reason was actually that voters didn't believe your election manifesto and thought you were more pro-European than the Tories.
Well,
and so the question is, shouldn't you consolidate that by formally saying, Labour, for example, would remain a member of the single market, would remain a member of the customs union, because that would consolidate that pro-EU vote?
That's the one part of a very good book I thought was a bit iffy.
Come on, answer the question.
I'll answer the question.
Because the British election study is the most serious analysis of why people vote.
No, I agree. But if you drill down into that study as well, you can see that our leads on the NHS and all the rest of it, we built up.
Sure.
What we need to do now, and this is a tougher politics now on Brexit,
Yeah.
if we are, and this is our ambition, and I think it's the right ambition, if it is about healing the wounds of Brexit, bringing people together, that's a tougher politics than just plumping for one issue.
Sure. Nobody's saying you should be a single-issue party.
Well, what I'm saying is that it is a tougher politics if you're trying to build consensus, and it is a slower politics to build up that consensus. But I think we're doing it because we think it's the right thing for the country, not just the right thing for our party.
And I was struck that when Jeremy Corbyn was sitting in that seat, he said he was, at the moment, against the British people having a second vote. But he absolutely refused to say that there might not come... He refused to say that he was ruling out a second vote forever.
Yeah, because we're worried that if you did go for example, like Alistair and others have said, look, why don't we have a second referendum? It divides the country again, and those divisions are really still there.
No, but you're, I think, saying the same as Jeremy, that right now you don't think it's the right thing, but you're not saying there might not be circumstances in which a second referendum
We'd never turn our back on democratic engagement, but our worry at the moment is if you had another referendum, it would divide the country again, and at the same time we would open up the potential of that sort of right-wing xenophobia, part of which we saw...
But what happens if in the autumn, when Parliament gets this meaningful vote, that Parliament says that Theresa May's deal is not the deal that Parliament wants? In those circumstances, surely there would have to be a referendum.
Well, I think better we have a general election. Better we have a general election.
On the issue?
On the issue and all the other issues, because you then have a wider debate as well.
But it's interesting that you're saying better, not ruling out a referendum.
Well, I think the better route is through a general election. Let me just say on the polling, counterintuitively, I've been talking to our own people, our own members, etc., and in some ways the polling, that narrowness has helped us, but because it's waking up to people that actually we're not just going to walk into government, it's not going to drop in our lap, we have to fight for every vote. And interestingly, if you look at the council by-elections, the real votes where we're really campaigning hard, we're winning very well.
Lovely to see you. See you again soon, I very much hope.